Good morning, and thank you for joining me on the Path to Liberty. I'm Michael Bolden with the 10th Amendment Center, and this is the show for Wednesday, October 25th, 2023. Thank you so much for being here, and you may be aware that 22 years ago tomorrow, that's October 26th, 2001, what should be absolutely hated and despised Patriot Act was signed into law. And as John Whitehead put in a recent article, he said, "We're still grappling with the blowback that arises from allowing one's freedoms to be eviscerated in exchange for the phantom promise of security. We are living 22 years of Patriot Act blowback, and I want to get right to this. Hear from a great article by Judge Andrew Napolitano, and he points out that there's a long tradition of this kind of thing throughout history, from George III and his Stamp Act of 1765, which resulted in British agents searching colonial homes without individualized suspicion, to George W. Bush and his Patriot Act of 2001, which enabled one federal agent to authorize another to search without any warrants in defiance of the Constitution. Tyrants have consistently claimed safety as the excuse and purported benefit of trampling liberty. And the people living in fear, of course, and this is my side, this is not Judge Knapp, the people living in fear will gladly look to the government, that often is the one that's oppressing them, and I'm understating this by quite a bit, to somehow protect them. The people with all the power are not the ones that you really should be going to. Anyways, Judge Knapp continues. In both 1765 and 2001, the liberty sacrificed was the right to privacy, the right to be left alone. Now, there was resistance in a much different way in 1765 than there was in 2001 and the years to follow. But we'll get into this a little bit more in just a moment. Now back to John Whitehead and his great article, 22 Years of Blowback from the USA Patriot Act, which I taxed the title for this episode from this article. And Whitehead puts it this way: rushed through Congress a mere 45 days after the 9/11 attacks. And if you think about this, and I don't want to get too tinfoil hatty here, but this is a massive piece of legislation that references, when you read through it, a lot of it is just referencing other stuff that's on the books. To knock that out in 45 days, to knock it out and get it passed and signed into law in 45 days, that means someone had to have had some ideas of how this needed to be done, this to legalize more violations of the Constitution. I mean, they're illegal because the Constitution is the supreme law of the land, but to put in statute that more violations of the Constitution were legal, it's like they had it ready to roll just in case something crazy went down. What a surprise. But anyways, rushed through in a mere 45 days after the 9/11 attacks, the USA Patriot Act drove a stake through the heart of the Bill of Rights, undermined civil liberties, expanded the government's powers, and opened the door to far-reaching surveillance by the government on American citizens. And of course, it didn't end at the Patriot Act. And a lot of people think that the Patriot Act is just Section 215, the Call Detail Records Program, which I believe expired in 2020. But they do the same thing under other authorities. And a majority of the Patriot Act is actually permanent. And some of the things that were set to sunset were, extended or made permanent. Now, when thinking about the Patriot Act, which obviously should never have existed in the first place, but was passed and supported in a time of extreme fear, it's hard not to think of Benjamin Franklin's great quote from 1755. "Those who would give up essential liberty to purchase a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety." And also, John Adams, back when he was one of the good guys, pointed out that fear is the foundation of most governments. Of course, I would just remove the word most on that one, but the sentiment is absolutely true, and we are living in that reality today. Anyways, I'm back to this Patriot Act discussion. Just a quick overview of some of the things that we got out of the Patriot Act. And I'm going to also talk about some of the things that we got to with some follow-up legislation that came out of the Patriot Act as well. First of all, from Epic, they give this overview. The Patriot Act expanded surveillance for law enforcement, federal, state, local, by expanding domestic and international wiretapping and pen register monitoring, expanding authority to access electronic communications. Mind you, this is all none of this is based on probable cause under oath. None of this stuff. Allowing secret sneak and peek searches, removing privacy protections to allow federal agencies to share more information, and expanding funding to federal law enforcement agencies. All kinds of loot they're stealing from you in order to supposedly protect you. And here from Sharon Bradford Franklin, great name, last name, Rethinking Surveillance over at Just Security. She points out that when Congress initially enacted the Patriot Act, 16 of the provisions, just 16, were subject to sunset clauses. Again, this is a massive piece of legislation, and only 16 parts of it would ever have a sunset, and a lot of those just were extended, meaning they were set to expire after 4 years unless Congress reauthorized them. In early 2006, Congress made 14 of those 16 permanent and set new sunset. I know I've seen some people over on X posting, oh, the Patriot Act is set to expire at the end of the year, getting hundreds of thousands of views. And this is just absurd. Almost all of the Patriot Act is permanent, and none of it should exist. So they made 14 of these sunset provisions permanent and set new sunset dates for the remaining 2. That's the Section 215 business records provision, allowing collection of a broad range of records without a warrant, and the Section 206 roving wiretap provision, permitting wiretapping where the government does not know the target's identity or location, as well as a third, the lone wolf provision, originally enacted in 2004, allowing surveillance without any showing that a target has any ties to any terrorist group. Of course, the notion that the Patriot Act was just going to be used for the terrorists was a lie all along. Anyone who fell for that is, I don't have positive things to say because you shouldn't trust government. Any power that you give government today, even if you think it's for something good, even if it's somehow you think that the people in power have your best interests at heart, sooner or later someone else is going to be in power and they're going to use that in ways that you never authorized to use it. This is the nature of humanity. This is the nature of government. Government will always try to expand its power and use it in ways that they were never authorized to. Back to Sharon Bradford Franklin. From 2006 to 2015, Congress repeatedly reauthorized these 3 sunset provisions with new sunset dates. Further, Congress has continued to renew, this is what people think is the expiration of the Patriot Act, is Section 702 of FISA with a sunset date on a different schedule. The next is December 2023. I think some people think that due to some kind of dysfunction in Congress, as if there's just brand new dysfunction because they can't find a speaker. But the fact is they've been dysfunctional since, well, almost immediately when they gave us a national bank in 1791. Section 702 is set to expire. But I'm going to get into a little bit here. Marcy Wheeler makes a great point over at emptywheel.net, and maybe it's the most important one. NSA has created a situation, and not just NSA, but FBI, all these surveillance entities, the federal government, the federal system, the deep state, really has a kind of a redundancy program in effect. They're okay, in essence. They will fight tooth and nail to get something like Section 215 continued and reaffirmed over and all over, the call details record program that they stopped even using, because they want to keep every lawful authority or anything under a current status quo precedent. They want to keep that power possible. But in case they ever lose in one situation, they always have a backup plan. So whether they get rid of Section 215 or Section 702 of FISA, they can do the exact same kind of warrantless surveillance under something else, like EO 12333, Executive Order 12333. And here's how she put it. The NSA almost never gives up a function they like. Instead, they make sure they don't have any adverse court rulings telling them they've broken the law and move the function someplace else. And this was in response to some reports a couple of years ago that said, well, I think this was in 2019. Oh, they admitted they aren't even using Section 215 of the Patriot Act anymore. They just stopped. So that mass warrantless surveillance collecting the call detail records, it's over anyways, no worries. But she's pointing out that they would rather shut down a program if they think it's going to get closed or stopped by a court because they want to avoid the negative court ruling. And instead they say, we're not doing this anymore. We're going to just continue it under something else. They never say the latter part. I mean, if you think about the idea, the notion that NSA used to be called no such agency, if you read James Bamford on this over the years, then that makes a lot of sense. Now, here's former NSA technical chief William Binney, he put it this way, and he said the heart of the program, the heart of mass warrantless surveillance, isn't even under the Patriot Act anymore. And this is from a couple of years ago over at ARS Technica. Back in 2014, he was pointing out that it was under Executive Order 12-333. He said this program was started at least back in 2001 and has expanded to between 80 and 100 tap points on the fiber optic lines in the lower 48 states. He continues, most of these fiber optic tap points are not on the East or West Coast. This is the former NSA technical chief, William Binney. This means that the primary target of this collection is domestic. Most collection of U.S. domestic communications and data is done under Executive Order 12333, Section 2.3, Paragraph C in the upstream program. I will link to this in the show notes because it actually has the text of that executive order and the specific section so you can read it in full on your own time. They claim, he says, near as I can tell, that all domestic collection is incidental. That's, of course, the vast majority of data. The argument, of course, that we're told is that they're only going after the terrorists, and once in a while they'll scoop up some what they call incidental. And so they're not breaking the law as long as they're not choosing American targets for this mass warrantless surveillance. But Binney's pointing out that the vast majority of the collection is incidental. So really, the intention is far different. Here's how EFF puts it. We also have Section 702 of FISA. He said they first passed in 2008 as part of the FISA Amendments Act and reauthorized whenever this date was. This looks like 2018 until December 2013. Section 702 is the primary legal authority that the NSA uses to conduct warrantless electronic surveillance against non-U.S. targets located outside the U.S. The two publicly known programs operated under Section 702 are Upstream and Downstream, which used to be called PRISM. If you followed the Edward Snowden leaks, you learned about PRISM for sure a number of years ago. Now, they say Section 702 differs from other foreign surveillance laws because the government can pick targets and conduct the surveillance without a warrant signed by a judge. I'm not sure where they're authorized to do that, but anyways. And they point out here that they get a lot of incidental collection on Section 702 as well. So they're just saying, well, we're not targeting Americans. We're just accidentally picking up all their information and then storing it and creating databases on everybody. And, well, someone can use that at some point in the future, but it's not us. Everything's cool. EFF puts it this way. The intelligence community uses the phrase incidental collection to refer to the seizure of Americans' communications under Section 702, actually under any warrantless surveillance. They just say it's incidental. It just happened by accident. We're not using this. No worries. It's a surveillance authority ostensibly aimed outside the U.S. that is expiring in 2013 or 2023. But let's be clear. The fact that Section 702 surveillance regularly results in the collection and search of innocent Americans' communications is an intended and inherent part of the system. And so even though they could get rid of the entire Patriot Act, all the permanent stuff, 90% of it, if not more, is permanent. Some of it has expired, very small parts of it. And then they have these other versions of the exact same thing, EO 12333, Section 702. And for all we know, there's something else that they haven't told us about. For example, we learned only 8 years after the fact that the DEA, in conjunction with state and local law enforcement, had been running a multi-year tracking program, tracking the location of everyone possible by the use of automated license plate readers, ALPRs. And over a 2-year period, we just out of 200 law enforcement agencies, not even close to all of them around the country, there was 2.5 billion scans. And almost none of them, and when I say almost none, it's statistically zero, were even suspects in a criminal activity. So they're just tracking and tracing everyone and everything. But I covered Section 702 and pointed out how basically they claim it's foreign surveillance, but it's really, this is really a part of the program to do mass warrantless surveillance of Americans as well. Total violation of the Fourth Amendment. I covered that in an episode a few years ago. Oh, it looks like 2.5 years ago. Like a Cancer, warrantless surveillance under Section 702. That will be linked to in the show notes. Of course, Alan Mosley has been doing an awesome job putting together the show notes for every episode. He gets that done within a couple of hours after the live stream is done here. And we'll have that published over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/path to liberty. While I'm here taking a quick moment with this, I guess we'll call it an advertisement. I'm not getting to the membership program yet, but stick around till the end. But I want to say a quick hello to everyone here out in the live chat. I appreciate you being here, whether this is your first episode or you've been here for every single one since day one. Hello to Haji and Kirk, Cheriton Farmer, Happy Snowfish, Tim Martin, Baz, Clay Kent, John, Tyranny is Bad, K is a great screen name, Murray Ray, DJ Plain Ice, Senator DT, Mac, I think I said Clay Kent, but hi again. Always good to see you guys. I really appreciate everyone watching. Mr. Greenbottle and everyone else. And I'm sure I'm skipping over a few people. I'm just kind of scrolling through, seeing if I can grab a few names. I really appreciate you being here. Again, 10thamendmentcenter.com/path to liberty is where you're going to find these articles, a couple of original source documents. I've got Benjamin Franklin. I'm going to wrap up with Thomas Paine here at the end, and then some other episodes and things like that. That'll be at 10thamendmentcenter.com/path to liberty. Anyways, but wait, there's more. So we've got the Patriot Act. Also, we also have EO 12333, where they do the same thing, if not the vast majority. Section 702, which some people will say is the vast majority. They've got three versions of the same thing, so they can just give up on one and look like good guys, and then people are blind and think government is here to protect us. Here from John Whitehead, again, another article. Who will protect us from an unpatriotic Patriot Act? And he points out that the Patriot Act also redefined terrorism. And I think this is a huge part of it that a lot of people miss, because we focus so much of our time and energy just on the surveillance authorities, but they also redefined terrorism so broadly that many non-terrorist political activities, such as protest marches, demonstrations, and civil disobedience. Remember, James Madison told us that the people should use a refusal to cooperate with officers of the Union in Federalist 46, arguing that the structure of the Constitution made that an essential tool to keep the federal government within the bounds of the Constitution, or even just stop bad policy that is within the bounds of the Constitution. So, I mean, they want to call it civil disobedience, but it's the government that's disobeying, and it's the people that are refusing to go along with it in that scenario. But of course, the Patriot Act gives us such a broad view of terrorism that we've heard in recent years that all kinds of weird stuff, someone might get brought up on terrorism charges. They aren't always, but I think we're always being probed for more and more and more. Demonstrations and civil disobedience are now considered potential terrorist acts, John writes, thereby rendering anyone desiring to engage in protected First Amendment expressive activities as suspects of the surveillance state. He goes on. Federal agents and police officers, also on the local level, are now authorized to conduct covert black bag sneak and peek searches, which I mentioned from Epic earlier, of homes and offices while you are away, and confiscate your personal property without first notifying you of their intent or their presence. They don't care about the Constitution, Bill of Rights, nothing to these people, as long as the people go along with it, of course. The law also granted the FBI the right to come to your place of employment, demand your personal records, question your supervisors and fellow employees, all without notifying you. It allowed the government access to your medical records, school records, and practically every personal record about you. And it allowed the government to secretly demand to see records of books or magazines you checked out in any public library. That's a little archaic, but the whole point is, but also internet sites you've visited. And if you've signed up, for example, like the TSA PreCheck program, and that's a whole nother story. Then we get the follow-up to the Patriot Act, which is to reform some of it, to reform all the surveillance and expand. This was in 2004. We got the Intelligence Reform and Terrorism Prevention Act. We think just the Patriot Act. A lot of people think just the Patriot Act is just Section 215. They ignore a lot of the other stuff. They say, well, that's been shut down, so everything's cool. And that's kind of what they do. That's the same thing they did with Obamacare. You know, you get rid of the individual mandate, and suddenly no one is opposing Obamacare anymore, even though there's so many onerous and unconstitutional regulations that are destroying the healthcare market with government control. Anyways, Intelligence Reform and Terrorism Prevention Act. We got this from this legislation, plus requirements in that legislation to pass follow-up legislation. This is just some of it. We got a director of national intelligence. We got the ISE, information sharing environment. If you think about the example that I gave about the automated license plate readers, we also got fusion centers. So in conjunction with the fusion centers and ISE, you have a scenario where if someone goes through a red light camera and has their license plate tracked in Salt Lake City or in Lehigh, Utah, or in Bangor, Maine, that all gets uploaded into the local fusion center or through ISE and shared with everybody. So you have an automated system where surveillance on a local level now becomes shared with literally hundreds of other agencies. Generally, it's around 200 or so agencies around the country, and some situations in San Diego, we've seen 600 to 800, basically everybody. So you create this nationwide program. Now, fusion centers we got out of the Homeland Security Act of 2002, which was also a follow-up to the Patriot Act, and it was expanded through the ISE in 2004, and then amendments to that in 2007. So we have a bunch of successive legislation from Congress that was absolutely garbage. We also got the expanded TSA screening process, the illegal search and seizure in order to travel. It required them to come up with a national ID, basically. The Real ID Act of 2005 was a follow-up. It also required, and a lot of people don't even talk about this, it required the Department of Homeland Security to start implementing biometrics at all airports. So when you hear things about how they're going to start doing facial recognition at all public airports, and they're starting to do test runs of that in a number of locations already just to check in, or they have it as a convenience, they're going to have facial recognition literally everywhere at all parts of all airports. They'll probably expand that to other places. But the command to make that happen to the DHS came from this follow-up to the Patriot Act, the Intelligence Reform and Terrorism Prevention Act of 2004. I would say that this is Intelligence Expansion and Terrorism Expansion Act of 2004. We also got the NCTC. That's the National Counterterrorism Center, and it sounds like a real positive thing. It's about 1,000 employees, the last I checked a couple of years ago. And it's kind of they have massive databases. For example, they serve as the basis for the TSA's no-fly terrorist watch list. Anyways, I covered this in some additional detail. Where's the episode? I don't know if I actually have it here. I don't have it up here, but I'll include the link. Patriot Act on steroids, surveillance state beyond Section 215, because it is pretty important to understand that even if they get rid of all of the Patriot Act, which they're not going to do, there's so much more that came out of it that a lot of people are just ignoring. These are kind of under the radar things as well. Anyways, here back to John Whitehead. He said, early on, U.S. officials solved the problem of how to implement their authoritarian policies without incurring a citizen uprising. Fear. The powers that be want us to feel threatened by forces beyond our control. Terrorists, shooters, bombers. Fear is the foundation of most governments. Fear is the foundation of government power. Now, John Adams went on to say that was in 1775, back when he was one of the good guys, before the Alien and Sedition Acts by a couple of decades. He went on to say, the American people are strong. They're never going to fall for this garbage. Well, maybe at the time they weren't going to, but by 1798, they certainly did with the Alien and Sedition Acts, and he was the guy signing it. So this is a lesson for all of us. Don't trust people with power, even the people that might sound awesome about the nature of power, because once they're there, they can do a lot of bad stuff. Anyways, back to John Whitehead. They want us to be afraid and dependent on government and its militarized armies for our safety and well-being. Most of all, they want us distrustful of each other, divided by our prejudices, and at each other's throats. And now, Patriot Act, I should point out, and again, this is another link that I did not include for some reason up on the screen, but I have one from sanctionscanner.com that we don't even talk about how the financial surveillance has expanded as well. We're talking about things like AML and KYC for those of you in crypto or banking financial situations. Basically, banks tracking who you are, deciding, your suspicious transactions. We have things called SAR, suspicious activity reporting. It's their excuse to kick people out of the banking system. And I think we're going to see them use that a lot more in the coming years. But anyways, John Whitehead put it this way. Once you trade your freedom for security, the terrorists win. Once you trade your freedom for security, the terrorists win. And that's, I think, kind of what Benjamin Franklin's quote really gets to the heart of. That if you give up liberty for so-called security, you really deserve neither, because you're making a terrible, terrible choice. And I know there's some interesting context about that. But Thomas Paine, I think, sums it up best. The strength and powers of despotism consist wholly in the fear of resisting it. It's not awesome news today, but I think it's essential that we cover this kind of stuff and we know far more than just the basic headline information. And this is the kind of work that we try to do every single day. Nothing helps us get this information out to more and more people more than the financial faith and support of our members. I see a handful of people, well, more than a handful of people out there who are members. I'm so grateful for your support. And if you have any ability to throw a couple of bucks of that dirty government fiat our way, our membership program starts out at just $2 a month. We also have annual, 5-year, and lifetime options over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/members. Again, 10thamendmentcenter.com/members. Don't feel any obligation to join us. But again, if you're, we've got like 10,000 plus articles. We're wrapping up. I'm getting a preview copy of our State of the Nullification Movement report for 2023. I think we kind of pared it down to about 150 pages in our full editing process to really make it as concise and hard-hitting as possible. So we should have that available soon for free. We'll have that online. I think we might make some print copies available for people as well. We've got tons of videos and podcasts. All this stuff is always going to be available for free. But when you're able to help us out financially, we can do additional stuff to spread the word even further. So if you can help out, 10thamendmentcenter.com/members. Let me take a look over in the live chat and see if there's any comments or questions I can get back to, since, well, I'm a little ahead of schedule today. I'm not as wordy as I often can be. I do see a few other people who popped in. Howard, Quick Gear Shifter, Eddie Swingler. These are some crazy stuff to people's rights, without a doubt. The fact of the matter is that as long as people allow government to do this kind of stuff, government has no reason to stop doing it. And as Thomas Paine put it, as long as people are fearful of taking a stand, then things are never going to get changed. They're never going to get changed. They're going to keep getting worse and worse and worse. Some people think we need to get a constitutional amendment to ban all this, but if it's already banned, that might be a bad approach. I mean, I know the other day, I think on Monday, I cited James Madison in Federalist 49 through 51, who specifically talked about using an amendments convention to enforce the Constitution, where he was totally opposed. He said, this is not a really good strategy for enforcing the Constitution, because if you think about it, it's a 5, 10, 50, he said 10, 15, or 20-year process. And if people who have already broken through the bounds of the Constitution are okay doing that, the notion that they might be sanctioned for their actions 15 years down the line is in no way a restriction on their actions. So using it to make changes, alterations to give additional power or reduce power is one thing, but to use it as an enforcement mechanism, James Madison was not on board with that. Let me see another comment or question here. Mass noncompliance is important. Socialism is banditry. Read your Bastiat. That's an awesome quote from Baz. I really appreciate that one as well. Anyways, I really appreciate you guys being here again. I hope you found this interesting. I hope it was educational. I hope it makes your blood boil a little bit like mine too, because we got to do something about this. And there was an interesting article over at the Mises Institute that I should have included, but basically it was, if you want to deal with the problems of surveillance, maybe the first step is to look at how you're using things like the internet and start looking towards tools where it's not as easy for them to crack through. And I think one of the best places to follow on this, whether it's like Odyssey.com, I think she's the really most prominent, is Naomi Brockwell, is really someone who focuses on technology and tools to help prevent attacks on your liberty through surveillance, whether it's through corporate surveillance that ends up getting shared with the government or through direct government surveillance to make it a little bit more difficult. Naomi Brockwell is my #1 recommendation on that. Anyways, we'll get that blog post for this episode up to date in the next couple of hours over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/path to liberty. I hope you enjoyed the episode. I really appreciate you being here, and I hope to see you next time here on the Path to Liberty.